Hello, I'm Jyotika. Welcome to Excelling Psychology. Today we'll begin with the lesson on solving November 2024 paper 2 for SL and HL. In this part of the lesson, I will cover the clinical, that is abnormal psychology section, and developmental psychology section. In the next part, I'll cover health psychology and psychology of relationships. So first I'll introduce to you what my approach is going to be in this video, who I am, and then we'll begin with the first question. If you don't want to go over the introduction and you want to directly come to solving the first question, you can just skip a little into the video, making use of the timestamps below. So firstly, to introduce myself, I'm an international school teacher and private tutor for psychology. I'm tutoring IB psychology students since more than 10 years now. So if you're interested in scheduling your classes with me, you can reach out to me. I have left my contact number and email ID in the description box and pinned comment below. In case you have any comments, any suggestions for the videos that I make or any questions related to them, please leave them in the comments box below. Please do not contact me personally for anything related to the videos. You can also contact me if you have any correspondence work with me. So some students just like to give me the answers that they have prepared for my corrections and feedback. For that type of work also, you can reach out to me. In this lesson, my approach is going to be to teach you how to write the answers rather than what answers to write. Mugging up or rote learning answers is of no use in the IB. You need to understand how to write the answers because there's just too much content for you to be able to memorize. So my approach is going to be to teach you how to write. I will be uploading model answers for your reference, not that those are only the answers which you have to write. But I do understand that sometimes you need a complete answer in front of you, just so that you can see exactly how to structure your answer, what terminology to use, how to organize the answer, what language to use, how to make critical analysis. So undoubtedly, I will be covering those things in this video, but of course, I won't be able to discuss full-fledged answers in a video. So I will put up model or sample answers on my website. I will link them in the description box and pin comment below. So if you want to refer to those, you can definitely download them from my website. I will explain to you how to write the answers. In the sense, in this video, I'll explain to you how to read the questions, how to look at the command terms and decide how to go about writing, how to interpret the wording of the question, and I will make outlines. I'll make some bullet points of what you can cover. As you know, in IB psychology, there are just too many theories and studies under every topic. It's not possible for me to cover all of them. Like for a question like studies related to clinical biases, there's not even an exhaustive list of which studies to cover. So yes, I'm going to be selective. I'm going to take only a few studies which I think are appropriate for the question, but do keep in mind, I want you to know right at the beginning, those are not the only studies that you can take to write your answer. So everything that I'm explaining in this video, take it in the spirit of this is one way of going about it. This is, you could say, an ideal way of going about it. So just use it as a reference. Don't take it as a final answer. These are the only possibilities of how to write an answer. Okay, so having said that, having completed the introduction, let's begin with question 1. The first question that was asked in the November paper was, evaluate one or more studies related to clinical biases in diagnosis. Also, I'm really sorry, but I just forgot one thing. I know that you might not be preparing all the possible subsections in any option. Like for clinical psychology, you might not be preparing diagnosis as well as etiology as well as treatment. You might be covering any one or two of them depending on how your school is guiding you. If you want me to make a dedicated video on how you can really simplify things and learn the minimum amount of content for the most effectiveness on the paper, you can let me know in the comments box below. I am discussing all possible questions in the video because I don't know which section you have selected to prepare for your options. So I will be discussing all the questions under clinical and all under developmental. You can use the timestamps below and you can skip to only those questions which are from the sections which you are preparing for. Okay, so let's come back to the question. The first question is evaluate one or more studies related to biases and diagnosis. Now, one thing you will see very prominently in the mark schemes for IB, they say do not write formulaic answers. They do not give much credit to formulaic answers, and this is the reason. This question is about evaluating studies. The command term, many students have a habit of looking at it in isolation. That is how they've been taught to look at it. Actually, you have to look at the command term in conjunction with the remaining wording of the question. They want you to evaluate studies. You could evaluate clinical biases by themselves, in which case most probably it would come as a discuss question, discuss clinical biases. So then you discuss what possible biases are there from the clinician side, from the patient side, from the diagnostic manual side. But here they are telling you very explicitly they want you to evaluate the studies. So coming back to why you cannot have a formulaic answer is because if the focus of the question is on the studies instead of the biases themselves, you have to devote your critical thinking to the studies, to their methodology, to their ethical concerns, rather than the larger topic of biases. Of course, you do link back to biases, undoubtedly, but you cannot evaluate biases for their own sake. Your focus has to be on evaluating the studies. So, what you need to do in your preparation for these answers is you need to have evaluations ready for studies as well as the larger topic, which is in this case biases. And I think most students have their evaluations ready for studies. That is what I have come across. Whenever I tutor students, their school has given them a lot of material on the studies. So these type of questions, in fact, without intending to, they end up answering correctly because those are the type of outlines they are having. It is in the discuss type of questions that they tend to focus on the studies instead of the larger topic and they lose marks. So we will come back to this point when we come to further questions, some of which are the discuss type. Okay, so one thing is when you're reading the question, you keep in mind that you have to evaluate the studies. So be fully focused on that. Focus is very important in IB psychology. Also, you know that this question is worth 22 marks. In terms of word count, you can aim for anywhere between 800 to 1200 words. Now, I know that's a very wide range, but that is what is recommended. I personally believe, which I have mentioned in my previous videos also, longer the answers, more depth that is covered. When students write very brief answers, the intention is just to write as short as possible. They term it as precise, but they inevitably end up skipping depth. It's like they just touch upon the content, the description, then they touch upon one or two evaluation points. There's no depth, especially in the evaluation points which they write. So I would say longer answers tend to be better just because they are more detailed and they are more in depth about the points that are being made, especially the evaluation points. So I believe you should go for a higher word count, not for its own sake, not just to fill up the space. That is not what I'm saying, or just so that the answer looks long. So that your answer is detailed enough to justify the criteria on the mark scheme. Okay, now how should you structure your answer? Just want to remind you, if you need to see a complete answer in front of you to understand better, it's not possible for me to cover in this video. So you can visit my website and you can download the model answers from there. Okay, to structure your answer in the introduction, and this is something that's going to hold true for all the answers that we go through. You do mention what studies you're going to be covering in this answer. As I mentioned in the introduction, there are just too many studies and too many theories under every topic of IB psychology. How should the examiner know which ones you have selected? So treat the introduction as that part of the essay where you make it clear to the examiner that this is what my essay or my answer is going to be about. So some suggested studies like which I prefer for this topic, of course there are many others possible. I prefer the Longnecker study. The Longnecker study is the one which discusses gender bias in diagnosis. And I prefer the Rosenhan study, which I think most of you prefer. It's the most popular one in diagnosis. This one looks at confirmation bias in diagnosis. Some of you might also term it as clinical bias, which is right. It's just that if you want to be more specific within clinical bias, this is one type of confirmation bias that is shown in the study. So in the introduction, definitely have to specify that these are the studies that I'm taking corresponding to these biases. If your studies are different, you mention your studies and the type of bias that they support. Besides that, for good measure, though this is not compulsory, I do believe that you should also just define what bias in diagnosis is. You could just, begin with a line on this is what biases are in diagnosis, or this is why the topic is important, and then you can boil down to, okay, these are the studies that I'm going to discuss. Strictly in one sentence each. One sentence on what is clinical bias. So your definition can be as simple as clinicians' judgments of disorders of patients being influenced by their prejudices or their opinions or their prior knowledge, something like that. So, just in one line. And why the topic is important? Because it can result in underdiagnosis or overdiagnosis of patients, either depriving them of treatment or giving them unnecessary treatment, which could be practically loss making and also stigmatizing for them. Anything of this you could give in one sentence. So, after having brought attention to what the topic is and why it is important, then you say in the present essay, therefore, I'm discussing these studies corresponding to these biases. Once you're done with the introduction, which I believe you should keep as brief as possible, because in terms of the mark scheme criteria, mainly it counts towards organization and clarity. Yes, a little bit of terminology when you're explaining what bias is. So just for that, remaining critical thinking, knowledge and understanding you're going to show through the studies, because in this case the question is about the studies. So then, be as quick as possible to coming to that section which is most important for scoring, which is the understanding of the studies and the critical thinking. Good organization is definitely taking it study by study. Don't merge the two studies. So don't take like long necker also you're taking from the beginning and Rosenhan also, just gets too mixed up. First discuss the long necker study entirely, critically evaluate it, and then come to Rosenhan. Okay, so for long necker study, like assuming you've completed one paragraph here of your introduction, you're taking the next one. You need to specify firstly which bias is being seen. As I mentioned before, gender bias, so you need to define what it is. Many times students ask me, because their schools emphasize so much on terminology, what terminology am I expected to explain? Whatever is relevant to the study or topic at hand. Not everything you've learned under biases, say though in the chapter of the textbook, whichever terms have come, no, only what is relevant. So right now, if I talk about the long necker study, gender bias is a relevant term. I need to explain that. So again, you could just give in a line that gender bias means the tendency to overdiagnose a disorder in a certain gender or underdiagnose it in another gender, or both at the same time. Now also, because they have said related to clinical biases, but they haven't specified for which disorder they want you to give the studies, you should specify which disorder you are currently looking at, which disorder the study is about. So long necker is about schizophrenia. I strongly recommend you define what schizophrenia is. So you can just give again a line on it that it's a psychotic disorder characterized by, say, hallucinations and delusions. Then you link the two. How is gender bias seen in the case of schizophrenia? Typically, it is men who are overdiagnosed, women who are underdiagnosed. That is what is believed. And then you transition into the study. You can think of this part as introducing the study, showing its importance by defining gender bias in schizophrenia. You're laying the groundwork for introducing the study. Or you could just take it as this is the part where I explain terminology which is relevant to the study. After this, you just summarize long necker et al. You could do it in the same paragraph, or I would suggest for neatness, you could take a separate paragraph. Whenever we summarize a study, we give aim, procedure, results, conclusion. Okay, now many students have a misconception that if it is an evaluate a study question, I need to give very explicit and perfect details, and then they get very demotivated because they can't remember every detail for every study. Like, I can't remember what is the exact sample size for long necker, or which culture they came from, or what was the exact numerical result in the study. Just because a question is evaluate a study, it's not the same as describe a study. And in fact, even in describe a study SAQs, which come in paper 1, there is no requirement that you give very explicit details about the study. So don't worry about those things. When you're summarizing, just make sure you're clear on all the sections. Aim, procedure, everything should be clearly understood. Doesn't matter that you're not able to give very exact details. And just keep in mind one thing, because it's an evaluate the study question. If you're going to make certain evaluations, say specifically about the sample size of the study, then make sure that you write the sample size, because then it has relevance. Like, without giving the exact sample size, also you could evaluate. You could say that it's a small sample, for example. But if you state the sample size, it makes it more clear, the point becomes stronger. So, in that sense, yes, those explicit details you can mention which you're going to use for evaluation later. Remember, the focus is on evaluation, not on describing the studies. That is why planning out essays is very helpful. What we are doing in this video for this paper, ideally you should be planning out all your essays, because the essay questions, though they are many, but they are quite predictable when it comes to IB psychology. So yes, there'd be a few places where you need to remember some explicit details for more effective evaluation. When you make your essay plans, you're able to put down those exact details, and you know, okay, this is what I need to prepare for this particular answer. Okay, so then you summarize the study. Just to give you a quick brief, in case you don't remember, and this is the study which is the one you're taking. This was just a review, a meta-analysis study, Longnecker et al. And they found that indeed the representation of male cases is much higher in research also, not only in actual clinical diagnosis. So males tend to get diagnosed a lot more than females, because in any given study, they found that males outnumber females usually by a ratio of 2:1, which is a big ratio. So then they concluded by saying that because males are represented more in research and clinicians base their diagnosis on research, they are primed towards believing that males are going to have the disorder more, so inevitably they end up diagnosing more males. Essentially, they are trying to say that in males and females, in actuality, the prevalence of schizophrenia might be exactly the same. It's just that overrepresentation is biasing clinicians towards believing that males have it more, and then they end up diagnosing males to a greater extent. So you just summarize the study in this way. Then I would suggest you take a separate paragraph for evaluating the study. Now, ideally, you should take two strengths and two weaknesses of any given study. And most students do prepare that way also, only what I've seen from the notes which are provided by schools. Just make sure your points are detailed. You could follow Peel format of writing, which just means that you need to give context and analysis for any evaluation point that you make. Most important is to link back to the larger question. I know we are not discussing biases as such, but still, even when you evaluate a study, you're not evaluating for its own sake. So, whatever you've evaluated, how it links back to biases, if it's a strength, how it helps us to further our understanding of biases, or if it's a weakness, how it limits our understanding of biases, make sure you're doing that for every point. Every evaluation point has to have quality in it. It's not about how many evaluation points you can give, it's not about breadth, it's about depth. So, make sure you're giving it in a detailed manner. For anything that you need to know about more, mark scheme criteria for evaluating or Peel format of writing, I've covered it in my previous videos, like those which are dedicated to ERQs, I have covered them there. So you can watch those videos for better understanding. This video will become very long if I get into all the 5 mark scheme criteria for the Peel format. So I will not be able to cover it exhaustively here. I'll just keep referring wherever it is relevant. If I talk about Longnecker et al., the strengths of the study are one, that there was a youth sample that was represented, because after all, it's a meta-analytic study. And of course, there's a lot of practical application of the findings, because it directly can help us reduce gender bias in diagnosing schizophrenia. So, of course, when I'm making an essay plan, I would write it this way, but when I'm writing in the paper, I need to elaborate on the point. I'll give you one example right now how you could elaborate on the point of having a youth sample, and then you could work on all the points, say practical application and the weaknesses in the same way. So, first, you begin by saying that one strength of Longnecker's study is the use of a youth sample. Since a meta analysis was conducted of more than 200 studies, they ended up having thousands of participants under review for their study. So this is context. I'm saying it's a youth sample, then I'm saying how come it's a youth sample, exactly what is the sample which I'm calling huge. So I've given context. Now reasoning in the sense, why is this a strength? I said a strength is the youth sample, but why? Because that increases generalizability of their claim that males tend to be overrepresented in research as compared to females, because this is repeatedly being found in study after study. And then, after giving this reasoning for why it's a strength, I link it back to gender bias. So this shows that gender bias is highly prevalent and it is a very concerning area for the study of diagnosis. So that is how I need to write. In an outline, I can have a term like youth sample written. Many students download ready outlines also. There are sites like, I forgot, I think Quizlet and all, where the points are just jotted down like this. But then why they lose marks is because they don't effectively elaborate on the point. They don't give context and reasoning like I have given. So that is the skill you need to work upon. Getting outlines, getting points for evaluation is not a big deal. It's very easy. Writing skills are what you need to work on. So make sure you're writing effectively. Same way you could elaborate on practical application. You could talk about how the findings of these studies can be used to refine research, make sure that males and females are represented equally, thereby reducing biases in the minds of clinicians when they refer to these studies, and when they base their diagnosis on these, they will not end up becoming biased during their actual diagnosis. In terms of weaknesses, of course, it is a meta-analytic study, so the weakness is going to be that it's not explanatory in nature, like it lacks explanatory power. In the sense that why are males being represented more than females? It's just an observation that that is the case. There is skew towards males. But why is it exactly happening? We cannot find out by just a meta-analysis study which just mainly looks at effect sizes and tells us, okay, these results are meaningful. Secondly, one more weakness is the meta-analytic problem again. Individual studies could have methodological inconsistencies. They have combined more than 200 studies. Not necessarily every study is methodologically sound. So whatever findings they've found, whatever results they've obtained might not be very credible. Okay, again, if you need, for every point you need to see the exact context and reasoning with which you need to write, that is then the model answer, which is there in my website. There I have written it completely with very specific context and reasoning. So you can download from there. So after having completed the Longnecker study and evaluating it, I will move towards the next study. Coming back to the question, it's evaluate one or more studies. So as such, many times students ask me, should we take only one or more? I recommend always the ideal number for one or more question is 2. So I would take 2. Why I've come down to 2, like what's the logic? If you take up more than 2, you end up sacrificing depth for breadth. It's just because you want to touch upon so many biases and so many studies. Of course, you'll touch upon all of them briefly. There is a word limit and there is time limit also. You won't be able to write everything in depth. So that's not a good approach, because in the mark scheme, when they tell you show your understanding, just by touching upon things, you don't show your understanding. You show understanding by going in depth. When they ask you for critical analysis, again, just specifying this is a strength, this is a weakness. Does not show your analysis. Elaborating shows your analysis. So when you take 2, that is sufficient for you to go into the depth of each. And if you take 1, sometimes it becomes a little sparse. Like there's not enough to discuss for an entire ERQ just based on one study. So that's why I feel 2 is ideal. It gives you the appropriate amount of breadth and depth necessary for your answer. Now, one study I've taken from the point of view of gender bias. And next, I'm going to take from the point of view of confirmation bias. To make the essay look coherent, basically to meet the criterion of organization and clarity, I always believe there should be a transition. In the sense, okay, you've completed long necker year, now you're getting into another study, Rosenhan. If there is some connect between the two, you can show that. Is confirmation bias stemming from gender bias? Is it the opposite of gender bias? What is it in relation to what you've written already? You can bring about it that way. But right now, what I've taken, gender bias and confirmation bias, they are not directly related to each other. These are two different types of biases. So, as such, I will not be able to link it. There should not be forcible linking, which is not actually there. So, it can just be a simple transition. It can be as simple as another type of concerning bias or a prominent clinical bias is confirmation bias. A slight link is there with what I've written previously, that this is also commonly found in the case of schizophrenia. So that way I can show a little coherence in the answer. So a little bit of linkage. Like I told you, even if two things are unrelated, doesn't mean you can't take them. They've allowed you to take any biases. So just saying that, okay, this was one type and this is one more type, even that is enough. But just make sure there's continuity in the answer. It should not look abrupt the way you're introducing the next bias. That is the only intention. Okay, then following the same pattern which we have taken for long necker, first we need to set a grounds for introducing the study by Rosenhan, which we can do by defining confirmation bias. So, what is confirmation bias? Having an initial hunch of what disorder the individual is having, and then following through that, regardless of any contradictory evidence being presented. So, you could just define it in one line. And then you don't need to define schizophrenia again because that is already defined previously. So, you can just directly say that, okay, this has been shown in the case of schizophrenia by Rosenhan. So, you can now introduce the study. Avoid being repetitive in your answer. If you've already defined something like schizophrenia earlier, please don't bring up the definition again. It's not required. Now, Rosenhan, you summarize in the same way. Aim, procedure, results, conclusion. Whatever I've said before, I will not repeat. All those standards of writing the study, which type of explicit details you should give, which you shouldn't give, all that I mentioned for long necker, all that applies here. So if you need to look at it again, you could just go back a little into the video and you can revise how to write the summary of the study. Now coming to the evaluation, for Rosenhan, my suggested evaluation is, in terms of strengths, it has, I believe, the most prominent strength of ecological validity. The fact that they conducted it in actual hospitals shows that confirmation bias really exists. It's not a laboratory phenomenon that they've presented. Besides, again, application is very strong. I think for any biases you take, even if you're not taking the ones I've taken, application is very good because preventing bias is the biggest application. It can lead to accuracy of diagnosis. So Rosenhan's study helps us to reduce confirmation bias. It creates awareness amongst clinicians and it encourages them to reflect on their diagnosis and revise it from time to time. But when it comes to weaknesses, one is definitely the sample size is small. I believe Rosenhan had only 8 patients whom he sent out to different clinics, no doubt, but that covers only 8 clinics. So, what we are finding in their case that they tended to overlook the patient's normal behaviors once they got admitted might be a phenomenon seen only in those clinics, might not apply to all clinics. So, we are not sure how much confirmation bias would exist elsewhere. Besides, of course, it is reductionist alternative explanations are possible. Why they tended to uh, continue with the same diagnosis, like when they let out the patients and gave them the label of remission of schizophrenia. Why they did that might not be because of confirmation bias. It might just be due diligence on part of the staff, just being cautious not to, let go of the a patient who potentially needs help. So that might be a better explanation. And in fact, in psychology, since these are mental disorders, the whole way of doing diagnosis is to rely on the patient's self-report. That is always how diagnosis goes about. So to call it confirmation bias would not be fully appropriate, because they were just following the due procedure that is required. That is what the clinicians were doing. So you could give that as an alternative explanation. Okay, so this is my suggested outline for any evaluate type of question, not only for this. Anywhere in paper 2, paper 1, you have an evaluate the studies type of question. I believe this is how you should lay it out. Finally, coming to a conclusion after writing all this. In conclusions, my preferred way, like many teachers have different ways of concluding, my preferred way is always a summary, no matter what type of ERQ it is. In this case, I would just summarize that both the diagnoses are important, and so both the biases are important to be investigated to lead to accurate diagnosis. And again, because the focus is on evaluating the studies, I would just summarize their strengths and weaknesses. Whatever commonalities are there in their strengths and weaknesses, first I would jot that down. Like both have very good application, again to bring down biases. And then I would summarize the weaknesses that are seen. That, and I would put it in terms of, okay, future studies can overcome these weaknesses in this way. Like for Rosenhan, future studies could make use of larger sample sizes, and for the meta-analysis study long neck curve, future studies can try to investigate more, explore more into the explanations for why gender bias is being seen. Is it truly that there is differentiation in schizophrenia prevalence in males and females, or is it that prejudices are there? The assumption is there that males have it more than females. So that is something that future research can look into. Many times students get confused in the conclusion. Should I summarize the weaknesses, or should I give what future study should do, or should I do both? It's the same thing. When you say that present studies are having these weaknesses, you're automatically suggesting that future research should not have these weaknesses. They should have improvements. So it's just a matter of wording. Either you say these are the weaknesses of these studies, or you say future studies can overcome these particular weaknesses. I prefer you put it in terms of future study suggestions. Just makes it look better. Okay, so just to quickly summarize what the outline is for this type of an answer. An introduction specifying exactly which studies we are taking up. Introduction to the first study, clarifying important terminology related to the first study, summarizing the first study, evaluating the first study in terms of a balanced evaluation, two strengths, two weaknesses preferably, each point in depth, transitioning to the next study, maintaining continuity and just showing why we are introducing the next study, giving the terms related to that study, just defining them, specifying those terms, summarizing the next study, evaluating the next study using the same approach, balanced approach of two strengths, two weaknesses, concluding the entire answer by summarizing whatever was in it, especially the evaluation points, because after all, question was about evaluation. So focusing mainly on the strengths and weaknesses that have been given throughout the answer, and presenting the weaknesses in terms of suggestions for improvement for future research. That is how I would structure and evaluate a study question. And whatever tips I have given in between, I want you to focus on those. Make sure your answers are abiding by those guidelines. Don't try to memorize the answer given you in my model answer sheet. Just use it as a reference. Let's come to the next question. Now I'll be able to go faster, because the first question I've explained most aspects of essay in detail, just little bit modification. Depending on the wording for the further questions, we'll have to do. Okay, for those who are coming to this question directly, say that you're preparing explanations or etiology, so you have come here directly. I'll try my best to give you all relevant points here, but I want you to know in the previous section, which I've just completed, I have given a lot of tips that can be helpful to you, even if you're not attempting diagnosis, but in general, how to write your essays. So if you have the time, do go back and just go over the first answer that has the most guidelines that I could give you. Also here the question is discuss explanations, that was evaluate studies. So in case they give you evaluate studies for explanations, like they change the wording of the question, what I've discussed in the previous answer could be useful for you to know to you for attempting this type of question and evaluate the studies type of question. So even if you're not taking up the biases or diagnosis topic, nevertheless I recommend you go and watch that answer as well. Okay. Now for those who have seen that answer also and are seeing this one also, let me point out what is the difference when it comes to evaluate studies versus discussing some theory, in this case explanations. Why they say the discuss command term is different? Because it is always attached to, okay, I'm sorry, my pen is not working, so I'll just highlight here. The discuss command term is attached to explanations rather than studies. Your perspective has to change. When you're evaluating studies, you're focusing on the strengths and weaknesses of the studies themselves. Here you have to focus on the strengths and weaknesses of the explanations. The studies are just going to be illustrations of the points that you're making. They're just going to supplement the points you're making. So no doubt you still have to give studies. No doubt you have to be critical about the studies also. But for the sake of the larger topic, whenever you're writing a study, you're thinking of this study is demonstrating some explanation that I have already described. When you're evaluating the study, you're thinking of whatever larger discussion point I'm making, whatever larger strength or weakness I'm giving of the explanation. The study is just serving as an example of that. So your focus changes and thereby your answer changes. It's not about the studies for their own sake, it's about the larger explanation. Okay, so this is how it is different from evaluate the studies question, and as I go about making the outline, you'll be able to see specific differences. The larger structure will look the same to you, but it is those subtleties which help you to score higher marks, which you'll be able to see. Also, now coming specifically to this question, keeping aside evaluate studies, the discuss command term just means that they've given you explanations, one or more explanations. Finalize which explanations you want to take. I would suggest two. Two helps you to maintain a balance between breadth and depth. So just take any two explanations, or alternatively take any one explanation and give two studies from that. Make sure you're having two studies in the answer, either to demonstrate that one explanation or two different explanations. And then discuss means give arguments about the explanations at large. Give arguments about why this explanation is good, why this explanation is bad. Keep using the studies, and beyond the studies also keep giving strengths and weaknesses of the explanations that are being made. One more way of thinking about the discuss question which can be really helpful is, besides methodological considerations that come from studies, like when I evaluate a study, I see its sample size, I see its experimental design. Besides that, what strengths and weaknesses are there of this explanation? If I just keep the studies aside, if I just omit the studies, what else do I have to say about the explanation? Make sure you have a lot more to say beyond the studies. Then your discuss answer comes out good. I remember this very excellent advice given by Professor Popov, who writes the main textbook for IB psychology. I think it's there in his exam guide. I forgot what that book is called exactly. He has given this advice, and this is something you need to implement when you are preparing your essay plans. If you omit all the study part and all the strengths and weaknesses related to the study, is there anything else left in your answer? If there is a lot else left in your answer in terms of describing the explanations and evaluating them independent of the studies, then you've written a good discuss answer. Otherwise, your answer is limited only to studies, you can't score highly in that type of an answer. Okay, now I will quickly go over and outline my suggestions for how you can answer this question. Of course, there are many other explanations besides the ones that I'm giving, many other studies that you could take even for the same explanations that I'm giving. Just follow the structure and the way of writing that I'm explaining. So, first I would, because they've said one or more disorders, I would clarify that I'm taking only one disorder, which is depression, and I would define it. As simple as it's the mood disorder characterized by intensely low mood with physical symptoms like lack of desire to eat, sleep, so forth. So, one line definition I would give. As I've mentioned for the previous question, introduction serves to give clarity to the examiner as to what you're attempting in the answer. So, specify which disorder you're talking about. There's so many disorders. How does the examiner know which one you are selecting? So, make sure to name that disorder and define it in the first place. Next, I will specify which explanations I'm taking for depression. I intend to take the genetic explanation and the related diathesis stress model. So, I would define each in one line. In fact, I wouldn't define it so much here. I would just touch upon it. Definitions I would give further into the answer. See, after all, let's discuss the explanation. So, there's a lot that I have to say about what the genetic explanation is exactly and what the diathesis stress model is exactly. Everything I cannot cover in the introduction. So, here I would introduce them just very briefly in one line, and their complete explanations I would give later into the answer. Also specify the studies that you're going to take. While studies are not the most important things in a discussed question, inevitably they are required. The structure of IB ERQs is such you have to only give studies. So just make it clear to the examiner which studies you're taking. I would say for genetic explanation, I'm taking Kendler et al., the most popular one. And for diathesis stress, again the most popular one, Caspi et al. So all these things I specify in my introduction, name out the explanations, disorder and studies that I'm taking. That is what the introduction is about. Next, coming to, because it is a discussed question, I must go into the depth of what the genetic explanation is. So here I would explain things like how inheritance of genes can create a predisposition for schizophrenia, and also how family studies and twin studies have investigated this, because I intend to bring in the Kendler et al. Study. So before bringing it in, I need to create a grounds or show the relevance of why I'm talking about that study. Because the genetic explanation is best reflected in family and twin studies. Then I would just give a line on what is the logic underlying twin studies, why monozygotic and dizygotic twins are compared, how comparing them helps us to conclude that any given disorder, if seen with a higher concordance in monozygotic twins, is bound to be genetic to a strong degree. So those type of things I'll explain. After having sufficiently given what the genetic explanation is, then I will bring in the Kendler et al. Study. Again, I summarize it in the same way as I explained for the first answer in terms of aim, procedure, results, conclusion. So Kendler study, it was just about establishing concordance rates of depression monozygotic dizygotic twins, and they found definitely higher concordance in monozygotic twins in the case of both males and female twins. Do specify exact concordance rates or percentages, it is important for this study. Even if you don't remember exactly, you can say higher, but I think it will help you further your discussion. When it comes to genetic explanation, the strength of the explanation comes from much higher prominent concordance rate seen in monozygotic twins. So I feel when you give the numbers, you're really able to emphasize and bring about how much higher it is seen in the case of monozygotic than dizygotic twins. So just to bring that emphasis, I feel it makes your answer stronger if you give the exact concordance rates. So I would say that sample size exactly or which culture they came from, not very important, but numerical results can, given the relevance to this explanation, can really bring up your answer. Now, this is the point where you'll see the main differentiation between an evaluate the studies question and discuss the explanation question. In evaluate the studies question, directly we came to evaluating the independent elements of the study, the methodological elements, like, okay, sample size is this much, or the number of studies, like in case of meta-analysis covered with this much. Or we also had a point on ecological validity, how realistic the study was. We are not going to be evaluating the studies in a discussed question. We are going to be evaluating the larger explanation. And any evaluation point of the larger explanation we can link to the study. We can show how that strength or weakness is seen in the study as an example. Let me show you a point that will make this clear. One strength of the genetic explanation is that it helps to understand individual differences. When people are faced with stressors, we see that some of them develop depression, others don't, even if they're undergoing the same stress. So, why is that the case? Because some of them have predisposition towards depression, so when a stressor comes, their genes manifest and they show depression. Others do not have a predisposition for depression, so even if a stressor comes in, they do not show depression. Those individual differences can be understood with the genetic explanation. Now, for example, in the Kendler study, it was clear that in monozygotic twins, the concordance rates are much higher. That gives credibility to the fact that genes do create predisposition for depression because the concordance rates are very large. So you have to explain it in this term. Did I evaluate the study for its own sake? Did I say the strength of Kendler is this? No, I said the strength of genetic explanation is that it can help understand individual differences. That is my argument. And I'm linking the study, I'm showing how the study is making this argument stronger by giving it credibility. So that is how to go about all the strengths and weaknesses. This is a strength of the explanation. The study adds to the strength in this way. This is a weakness. The study brings about the weakness in this way. Okay, another strength of genetic explanation is methodological support. Here again, it will sound as if I'm evaluating the study, but I'm not. I'm saying lots of studies have been done under the genetic explanation, huge studies, huge meta-analysis, and they have repeatedly found that concordance is higher in twins, monozygotic rather than dizygotic twins. Kendler is one example of such a study. And that is why genetic explanation by itself is very credible because of the incredible methodological support that it is having. So that is one more strength of the explanation itself. Coming to weaknesses, one weakness is definitely it is a reductionist explanation. It just tells us part of the story. If genes were the entire explanation for depression, then in monozygotic twins, concordance should have been 100%, which is not the case, showing that environment also plays a role. And as concerns studies like Kendler et al., they don't investigate the environment, they don't give it its due importance. So that becomes a weakness of the explanation. This, in fact, is the main point. Alternative explanations are possible in a sense it supports reductionism only. When we are assuming that because of genes a disorder is there, that's just an assumption. There can be other reasons which could override genes or which could go along with genes. Again, that comes down to environmental factors only. So using this weakness as a transition point into the next explanation, I will come to it. As I explained to you in the previous answer, for evaluate studies, there should be some coherence in your answer, some continuity. So now that I want to move towards diathesis stress model, why am I going to that? So far what I've discussed, how is it going to be relevant to diathesis? It's going to be relevant because I have just pointed out that genetic explanation is incomplete by itself. So what can be a more complete explanation? The diathesis stress, which gives equal weightage to both. The diathesis, the genetic risk factor, and the stress, the environmental factor. So in this way, I can logically transition to the next part of the answer, and I can also start explaining the terminology for the next explanation. What is diathesis and stress? So what I do over here is after I've completed evaluating genetic explanation, I link it to diathesis stress model. I define the model in a sentence. Not in a sentence actually, in as much depth as is required because it's a main concern. So what is diathesis exactly? What types of diathesis are possible? What is stress? What types of stress are possible? Just need to explain those things nicely. briefly, not in too much length as such, but just explaining with clarity what these things are. And then I link it to Caspi et al. And then same way, like I've given Kendler et al., I give a summary of Caspi et al. So I'm sure you can remember Caspi et al. Is that study in which they investigated whether their participants were having short or long alleles of the 5-HTT gene, exactly which combinations they were having, and they also asked them about major stressor events in their life, and then they determined which patients, like which participants, which type of genes and which facing with how many stressful events were more likely to develop depression and which were less likely to develop. Now, strengths of the diathesis stress model. Like one strength is it helps to understand the exact role of genes when it comes to depression. It is like a delimiting type of explanation in the sense that while Kendler et al. Studies make it seem that genes are the only explanation, Caspi et al. Type of studies give us a more accurate evaluation of okay, this is the extent to which genes matter, not more than that. Remaining can be explained by the environment. So by itself, the explanation becomes more holistic, more explanatory. Explanatory power is greater than the ordinary genetic explanation. Besides that, again, because we do like to evaluate studies, so methodological support is there from quality studies like Caspi et al. What are the strength of such studies? Caspi et al. Being one example, that they have genetic testing, DNA testing, which is very accurate. They also look into diversified type of environmental stressors that individuals might be going through. So they're very detailed and very accurate in some of the methods that are used, mainly the physiological methods, which increases the credibility of the diathesis stress model itself. But what is a weakness of these studies? Definitely, even in this case, alternative explanations are possible. Because why alternative explanations have room? Because there is limited exploration when it comes to environmental factors. The model proposes that stress can come from number of factors, but the studies have been such that they've just looked at major life events. Sometimes minor daily hassles can accumulate to create more stress than major life events. So those alternative explanations are possible, which are overlooked in a great degree in the diathesis stress type of models. Also, you could take reductionism in the sense of not only daily hassles, but there are so many other explanations. I'm sure you've at least heard of some of them, even if you're not preparing them. Cognitive explanation by Beck, those could be better explanations. In fact, even they can create diathesis. Faulty belief systems that are coming from childhood might be creating the diathesis, which can combine with stress later to create depression. Diathesis does not have to be strictly genetic. So that is also one issue with the diathesis stress model. The traditional one, at least, that it assumes that diathesis must come only from genetic vulnerability. So in this way, you can give strengths and weaknesses. Now the conclusion is going to be very similar to the one for the first answer, like evaluate the studies. Conclusion does not differ much in a different command term question. So you could just summarize the strengths and weaknesses. You could find what are the commonalities and strengths and weaknesses and just jot them down, in the sense that both explanations do have some amount of explanatory power. They have strong methodological support. So that's been good when it comes to these biological type of explanations of depression. But of course, we can give recommendations for future studies. Looking at what are the weaknesses of these explanations, we can recommend what direction future studies should take. One is that because alternative explanations are possible and these have been reductionist, so future studies can look into how genetic explanations can combine with other explanations to give an even better account of depression, or how maybe it can be overridden by other explanations. What other better explanations are possible? That can also be looked into. So I just want you to see how we structure a discuss type of question. As I told you, it broadly will look like they evaluate the studies type of question only. But when you look at the individual points and the importance given to each section, you will realize the difference. I'll just summarize it for you. In the introduction, we bring about what we call the main arguments, or in this case, just which explanations out of so many possible we are going to be focusing upon. So, just specifying that, making it clear to the examiner which explanations we are looking at with the help of which studies. Then we give good description of the first explanation, because the focus of the answer is on the explanations, not on the studies. So, not very lengthy, but instead of jumping too soon into the study, we just give a good, clear description of what the genetic explanation is about. Then we come to the study, describe it very briefly, because that's not the main focus. So just giving key points which supports genetic explanation, basically concordance rates. Then giving strengths and weaknesses of the genetic explanation by itself, not of Kendler et al. Specifically. This is the key differentiating point for a discuss question. So giving larger strengths and weaknesses and taking Kendler et al. Wherever possible as an example of those larger strengths and weaknesses. Then transitioning into the next explanation by linking it with the previous, showing what was the limitation in the previous that is overcome by the next explanation. That gives a logical order also. It tells you also which you should take first, like genetic you should take first and then diathesis, because diathesis is more holistic compared to genetic. Then giving Caspi et al. As an example, again a brief description of the study, strengths and weaknesses of diathesis stress model, giving examples from Caspi et al. And then in conclusion, simply summarizing the main arguments made, the strengths and weaknesses of those arguments, and then suggesting further research how it could improve over the weaknesses. So that is how we can write a high scoring discuss answer. Okay, let's come to the next last question in clinical. Discuss the effectiveness of one or more treatments for one or more disorders. If you've come to this question directly, I would recommend you just look a little into the previous one, because it is a discuss command term again. So I do believe that most of the structure is going to be exactly the same. It's just that the points are going to differ. So I'm going to be telling you about the structure, but not as much as in depth as I've already discussed for the second question. So even if you're not preparing for explanation, you could just take a look at that section, and all the guidelines I've given there, you could apply to this one, to the treatments one. In the introduction, firstly, I need to clarify to the examiner which disorder or disorders I'm taking. I'll take one disorder, because that taking another one would mean I would have to explain that disorder also, which is, I don't think I have that much word count and preparation time before the exam also to prepare so many disorders. So just taking one. In the main course companion, depression is there. I think most of you take depression. Most study sites also support that. So in the introduction, first I will explain what depression is. I will specify which treatment or treatments I am talking about. I intend to take only one treatment for this answer, the drug treatment. But two studies, as I have explained in both the previous answers, why we should take two studies for an ideal balance between depth and breadth. So the studies I'm going to take are Kroenke et al. And Kirsch et al. I've deliberately taken these studies for this answer because when I was writing the model answers, I thought of, okay, my approach is generally to take two arguments, like say two treatments or two explanations and link. But then in so many schools, the way of structuring the answers, argument and counter argument. Like teachers really emphasize on counter arguments, which can become very challenging at times when we are not able to find the best counter arguments. So I thought, why not have one answer in which I take the argument counter argument format. So just to show you how essentially all formats are the same way, because argument counter argument is like another argument. But at the same time, if that is your way of preparing, so giving you an example of that. So that's why I've taken drug treatment. One argument is going to be around it, which I will come to, supported by Kroenke et al. That basically the argument is that drug treatment is much more effective than placebo. That I'm going to illustrate with Kroenke. But the counter argument is going to be the file draw problem, which I'm going to illustrate with Kirsch et al. So after giving in the introduction which disorder which treatment and which studies I'm going to cover in this essay. Then I come to the first treatment, the first argument I need to explain in detail. So, what drug treatment is exactly? What are antidepressants? What are their working mechanisms? What type of antidepressants are there? Very precisely, but with clarity, I'm going to explain initially. And then coming to the argument that they have been established to be much better than placebos. Better than placebos operationally, or in what sense is that they are effective in bringing about sustained improvement from symptoms. And then I would say that this is demonstrated in the Kroenke et al. Study. So here then I would introduce the Kroenke et al. And summarize it as I do in the previous answers. What is changing here? If you compare with the previous answer on discuss, what is changing? Nothing actually, and a little bit. In both sense you can take it. Nothing in the sense there, an explanation by itself was an argument. Like I told you, just explaining what genetic explanation is was the argument. Here the argument is more explicit. It's not just that drug treatment is effective, it is about what exactly the effectiveness is, because we want to counter argue later. So in a sense, we are still giving an argument only, we are talking about a treatment, but we are just emphasizing some aspect of the treatment so that we can counter argue against it later. Rest remains the same. We are explaining core terminology like what is drug treatment, what are antidepressants. We could also, not important, but you could explain what is a placebo in a line, in 2-3 words when you're going about it, and you're introducing the study, you're taking the study as an example. So really matches with what we did in the previous question. Kroenke et al., we can summarize briefly. It was that study in which they found the 3 types of SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, were all more effective than placebos in bringing long-term improvement from depression symptoms. Then again, we would give strengths and weaknesses of drug treatment as a whole and its effectiveness as a whole, rather than of Kroenke et al. In particular. Kroenke et al. Will just serve as example. So strength of drug treatment is definitely application. If we are saying that it brings about sustained effectiveness, then it just means that it's going to be useful to a lot of patients. We can also bring in the point that at more reasonable prices, affordability for the patient compared to what CBT would cost them, or without active participation in CBT, which can be very challenging for demotivated depression patients. So because usually why we can bring this point is because CBT is considered to be better for long-term effectiveness. But this treatment has, SSRIs have shown long-term effectiveness as good as CBT. So then we can say this is a very good alternative for that. Also, methodologically, studies like Kroenke et al. Give very good credibility to the drug treatment, because so many different drugs have been trialed in these studies, even within SSRIs, different types of SSRIs, just showing that multiple drugs have a lot of effectiveness. But coming to weaknesses, and again, like in the previous answer, using that to transition to counter arguments, whatever is seen as effectiveness of antidepressants in these studies might be nothing more than a placebo effect. How are we to say that the SSRIs have been effective, or it has just been the expectations of patients that have led them to improve? So are they really credible? Whatever improvements we are seeing, are they really creditable to the drugs, or should we take them as superficial effects that have been seen? And we can link it to Kroenke by saying doesn't really help to understand, because there's no placebo control group in that study, and there are many such studies which have lacked sound methodology by not including control groups. So this explanation has only been superficial or correlational in nature. The cause effect is very difficult to establish because of lack of blinding and lack of control group that has existed in many studies. This point only I will use to transition into Kirsch et al. Meaning that this only I will use to bring about the counter argument that in fact the effectiveness which we assume of antidepressants might be nothing more than a placebo effect, which has been illustrated completely in the file drawer problem. So we can talk about how the studies which have shown that antidepressants are no better than placebos have just been filed away because they have not received sponsorship from drug companies. Drug companies sponsor this research, they have vested interests, and that is why they let publication of only those studies which support that drugs are effective so that they can increase sales and thereby profits. They do not allow such studies to be published which goes against their agenda or their profitability. So we need to explain that in length. Don't be in a rush to bring in the Kirsch et al. Study because the question is discuss the effectiveness of treatments. So make sure you're discussing the effectiveness of treatment, how it is being challenged by the fact that studies are sponsored by drug companies. You are not to give Kirsch et al. For its own sake. So don't be hasty or don't bring too much focus on the study. After you have explained all these issues, what they are, what is the file drawer problem exactly, then you bring in the study and you summarize it. Okay, and as always, you summarize it very briefly, focusing on the key sections: aim, procedure, results, conclusion. After giving that, that study has just shown that they've, upon taking like a lot of published and unpublished data, if we take unpublished data also into consideration, it clearly shows that drugs are not effective as effective as it is assumed. What is the strength of this counter argument? Not Kirsch at all. Like, what is the strength of bringing about like the whole thing of file drawer problem is that application is there. It brings attention to the fact that what is being conveyed to the public might not be accurate. They're not being allowed to take informed decision of whether they should take drugs or not. It's being imposed on them to believe that drugs are going to be effective, which can be an ethical concern also, in the sense that they become very hopeful to overcome their depression by taking drugs, whereas in reality they might not bring them any benefits. So the application is to helping avoid such ethical issues, big large scale ethical issues, and to make sure that malpractices get curtailed in the publication industry for drug studies. Also, in terms of methodological strengths, if we link it to Kirsch et al., studies like Kirsch et al. Are very credible because when they've taken their published and unpublished data, they've come from FDA sources, and they have used very good methodology by selecting studies without any biases. They have selected those studies which have been overlooked in the past. So, using very strong methodology, credible sources, they have established that the file drawer problem indeed exists. So that just gives weight to the counter argument that we are making. In terms of weaknesses, one issue with these type of arguments is that there is criticism, and what the criticism is exactly is that no doubt concern is valid. Like, the criticisms don't say that the file draw concern is invalid, but there might be an overemphasis on it, or there might be overgeneralization rather, by assuming that all studies are suffering from the file draw problem. Every result shown by every study is inaccurate. That's not the case. Lots of studies are credible in meta-analysis like Kirsch. Like, this is where we can link it to Kirsch. There's a tendency to just bring about averages. Meta-analysis are about bringing about averages. So we just bring about averages and we assume that Okay, this problem exists in every study. Not necessarily, some of the studies might be very credible, which have shown effectiveness of certain drugs, which indicates that some antidepressant drugs might be better than others. And we should not rely on a broad average to assume that all drugs are equally ineffective. So the counter argument needs to be a little more specific so that in the larger picture we don't do away with a treatment that can actually be beneficial to many patients. Like if we discard antidepressants as a treatment or discredit it just because some studies are suffering from file draw issues, that would be disservice to patients who can actually benefit from it. So you can explain it that way. And another weakness could just be that overall, all these depression trials which are there, be it Kirsch et al. Or any other, they tend to represent mild to moderate cases. For ethical reasons, they don't include severe cases of depression. So, whatever issues we are feeling, that antidepressants might be no better than placebos. It might be a concern for only mild to moderate, not for the severe cases where antidepressants are needed the most. Concluding this answer, same like all previous conclusions, we can just summarize the strengths and weaknesses that we have given previously, and the weaknesses, how they could be improved upon, we can give us further direction for research, future research. Okay, so that is for the clinical section, what we can cover. Now we will go over to the developmental section. I'm going to go over a little quickly for the developmental section because the video is becoming a little long. So I will broadly explain to you for every answer how I'm going about writing it. But if you need more details, exactly how to write the answer, please go into the timestamps. The second question which I have discussed for clinical, it's a discuss type of question. All the development questions are the discuss type in the November 24 paper. So even if you're not attempting clinical psychology or that particular question in clinical psychology, still it will be useful for you to phrase all your discussed questions in detail. And I want to remind you again, if you need complete answers to see exactly how they are to be written, you can download them from the website that I'm linking in the description box and pin comment. Okay, one question in development was, discuss the roles of peer and or play in cognitive and or social development. Many authors have brought about this issue in developmental option, which is why many schools don't select it. There are too many and or type of questions that are phrased. So students end up getting really confused about, should they take both the factors which are given, should they take one, so should they go for and or. I believe this is not much of a concern in my opinion because you make your essay plans anyway, and these questions tend to be structured in this way only. So I feel that just be sure which you know better, plan it out accordingly. Like be ready with that type of answer only, and then regardless of how many ever they're asking you, just stick to the one which you have prepared. So for me, it is just about being aware of how the question can be phrased when you're preparing your essay plans. So just look at a lot of past papers, how the questions have come, and make sure that you are preparing accordingly. Okay, when it comes to discuss play on social development, first, because the question is complex enough, just clarify for the examiner what exactly you're taking up in your answer. So do that in the introduction. First, you can define what play is. Like I'm going in for play. That is the factor which I'm going to take throughout my essay. So what is play? I would define that, hinting to the examiner that this is the fact I'm talking about. If instead you're taking role of peers instead of play, then just define what peers are in the introduction. Now, I'm going in for cognitive development. If you're going in for social development, you bring about that which aspect of social development you're going to discuss. I'm going to discuss cognitive development in the form of overcoming egocentrism and encouraging problem solving. So these you can think of as these are my arguments for the discuss essay, or these are the two problems that I'm going to highlight, or two areas of cognitive development that I'm going to discuss. So again, just clarifying to the examiner that out of all possible things that I could talk about in cognitive development, these are the ones I'm talking about. If instead you're combining both, so you're taking cognitive also and social also, then just make sure which aspect of cognitive you're taking and which of social you're taking, you define. You just mention here. As far as what is egocentrism, what is overcoming egocentrism and all is concerned, I would suggest don't take it in the introduction. Save it for later because you need to elaborate in detail. That's the main focus of your discuss question rather than the studies. So make sure that you just mention these are the factors or areas of development which I will be looking into and which studies will be supporting. Then have an independent paragraph for what is egocentrism, what is overcoming it in the body of the answer and show your understanding over there. So as far as overcoming egocentrism is concerned, that is supported by the Nedos-Pasova study. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing. So I will just mention here that this is the study I'm taking for it. And as far as developing problem solving is concerned, the Silva, Brunner and Genova study, that is the one which I'm going to take. So this is what my introduction should look like. Just specifying to the examiner whether I'm taking peers or play. Since it's given as an option, I'm specifying I'm taking play, taking the opportunity to define it also to make for a good introduction. And then because again, cognitive and or social development, I'm specifying I'm taking cognitive development. And again, because that is also a large area within that, which are the areas that I'm going to talk about, just specifying that as well. And then just naming out the supporting studies. Again, just showing to the examiner, this is my particular focus in my essay. Now, of course, my next paragraph is not going to be jumping into the Nedos-Pasova study. That is something I can do later. I want to first at length explain what is cognitive egocentrism and what is meant by overcoming it. So in a paragraph, first I'm going to explain what is cognitive egocentrism, at what stage it takes place according to Piaget, and according to Piaget, again at what age it is overcome. All those things I will explain. So because it's a discussed question, it's not about evaluating individual studies, my focus is going to be on the larger area of egocentrism. And then after that, after I have explained all these aspects, also I will explain the 3 mountain stars, because now I start narrowing down to the study. Now I want to transition into the study because I want to use it as an example of showing how cognitive egocentrism is overcome through play. So in that study, 3 mountains task has been used. So then I'm going to explain what it is so that there is clarity to the study. All this counts as showing understanding, as explaining terminology in the mark scheme. So first, larger terminology is explained, like larger concept of cognitive egocentrism, and then more specific and relevant terminology, like which is relevant to the Nedos-Pasova study. Okay, after explaining all these things, then I summarize the study in terms of aims, procedure, results, conclusion. No need, as I've mentioned in previous answers, to give any specific details. Broadly, you can just define, make sure to follow the aim procedure format to give it good organization. This was the study in which children showed egocentrism, just as all pre-operational children show. But then the researchers trained them through play, through the use of dolls. This was the sibling study in which they were told that one doll has 2 siblings, left to imagine they are one doll and all. You can revise that. So then through training them, through that sibling doll play task, then they made them answer the 3 mountain problem again, and then they found after having learned from the play task, they were able to overcome their egocentrism and they were able to solve the 3 mountain tasks correctly, though they were just in the pre-operational stage. Which means that indeed play can be used to advance development, to speed up the development process even before the child can reach certain milestones of certain developmental stages. After having summarized Nedos-Pasova in this way, then I will give the strengths and weakness for the study. For the argument is that play can help overcome cognitive egocentrism. A strength of that is that it is very much theoretically aligned to very well validated theories like Vygotsky's. If I say that Teachers or parents can use play as a tool to help children overcome their cognitive egocentrism. It's exactly aligned with Vygotsky's concept of scaffolding, in which he said MKOs, more knowledgeable others, can help children overcome their zone of proximal development. So it has very good theoretical backing. In discuss questions, keep in mind that you have to evaluate the larger arguments, not the studies for themselves. So I've evaluated the argument by saying it aligns with Vygotsky's scaffolding, and then I can give an example from Nadasposova by saying that in that study, that is exactly what was found. In fact, the study was very controlled and valid. So studies like these, which are very valid, they give credibility to this potential of play in overcoming egocentrism, because like we saw in the study, the way of training the children was very standardized. It was scripted how they are going to help the children to bring about their attention away from themselves to another individual. So that is why we can be assured that yes, play does work in helping overcome egocentrism. There is no doubt in that. But a weakness is that these studies tend to be very artificial, very laboratory based. The way of establishing play in these studies is very scripted, as we mentioned earlier. But in reality, play tends to be very spontaneous. In fact, it generally has no involvement of adults. It's usually same age peers who are playing with each other. So it seems to be more of a laboratory phenomenon that play can help overcome egocentrism. Rather, it could just be that it's more of something instructional. It aligns more with a different form of instruction to children. It might not be play in the true sense. What is being done in the laboratory to help children overcome egocentrism, we can barely call it play. So that we can give as our arguments for weaknesses. As always, what I wanted to focus on is I'm evaluating the role of play in egocentrism, not the study for its own sake. That is key to scoring in discuss. The key to scoring in discuss is having arguments, or whatever you call it, argument, counter argument, and keeping your focus on those arguments and counter arguments, not just drifting away to studies entirely. After having said this, now to transition to the next argument. Here, there's not much linkage with the previous. It's just that one more area of cognitive development is benefited from play, which is developing problem solving. So that is how I would introduce it, or that is how I would transition into it. That okay, just as play helps in overcoming egocentrism, it can also help in developing problem solving. And then what I would do is explain what is object manipulation. As I told you, first we explain the larger terms. So I've explained at large what is problem solving. I'll explain it here. And then I will come into what is object manipulation, because that is necessary for the Silva study, which is going to come next. Okay, so then I'll just define that. If you need to see all these definitions and all, I'm a little short on time. I can't give all the explanations in this video. So if you need to see the definitions and all, they are there in the model answers. Exactly how it is to be written in the paper, I have uploaded. Okay, so because this is relevant, I will explain what is object manipulation, and then again I will come to the summary of the study. So Silva, Brunner, and Genova aim procedure results. In that sense, just to give you a quick insight, this study was about the stick and the clamp problem. Children were given two sticks to pull up a toy which was out of reach. Reminds me of the gorilla study, anyways, not to deviate. The stick and the clamp study. So, children had to learn to join two short sticks into a long one by attaching it with a clamp. So, what the researchers did, in many ways, they showed them how they can come to the solution of joining the sticks, one of which was through play. And they found that play is as good as vicarious learning, that is, seeing models solve the task correctly is as good as play. Showing them through play, like allowing them in fact to play freely in this study. They were allowed to play spontaneously. That also led children to the correct solution. So play is as good as very well established mediums like vicarious learning for problem solving. That is what they showed with the help of their study. In terms of strengths, what is good about taking play as a way of problem solving is application. Children love to play basically, so if we can encourage playing in them instead of discouraging, which has become the case, too much emphasis on studies and not allowing children to play. So if we can encourage them to play spontaneously, in fact, it could help them develop their academic skills better rather than just attending school. So that's one very good thing. And of course, we can link it to the Silva study, and we can say that these type of problems can be encouraged even say in school time. Children can be allowed to play with these type of equipments and problems to better refine their critical skills. And another strength definitely would be that there is very good methodological support from studies like Silva, because there was very good manipulation in this study. There were 4 comparison groups, and comparing against all of that, they found that children engaging in play were very good in solving the problem. So we know comparisons, control groups, baselines, they give a lot of credibility to larger explanations. We can also, one more way of giving coherence to an essay answer is to keep linking some critical points with previous. Like in the previous one, we had said that in studies on overcoming egocentrism, play has not been spontaneous, but in this one, it was spontaneous. So, because both pertain to cognitive development, at least some studies on cognitive development do have a spontaneous play. They are more realistic. So, we can link it that way also. But coming to weaknesses, no doubt the play was spontaneous. Despite that, it was based on equipment. And if we are seeking to have practical applications from this, we want that children should develop their skills through spontaneous playing, might not be possible in those cultures where such equipment is not available, such as the developing type of countries. So then we are not saying that it's invalid, it's valid to say that play can help problem solving, but that might be true only for certain cultures. The application might be restricted. It might not apply to all cultures. Besides, other strategies are also helpful, like seen in the Silva study. Even vicarious learning or modeling is good for children to learn how to solve problems. Then we are not sure what exactly is the merit of play. It can be more time consuming. In fact, why not teach children through modeling how to solve problems? Why should we focus on play instead? So, what is the merit of play over other strategies is not very clear from such studies. Then, finally, of course, we can conclude the answer with a summary of all the arguments, strengths, and weaknesses we've given. And for future research for this type of an answer, we can suggest spontaneous play along with freely available play should be studied without equipment, without what I would say culturally fair type of play should be investigated more. And finally, how play can override other methods of learning, or exactly how it should be preferred over other methods that can also lead to cognitive development should be investigated in future research. So again, just to quickly focus on the structure, it's a discuss question. We define the key command terms in the introduction, bring the examiner's attention to exactly what we will be covering in the answer first. We explain the general terms. We summarize the first study. In terms of the terms, that is the larger argument given. We always, the conclusion of the study, we link back to that argument, emphasizing why that study is important for the argument. We give strengths and weaknesses of the argument. In this case, that play reduces egocentrism. And while giving those strengths and weaknesses, we keep drawing examples from the study. Same thing we repeat for the next study. And then we conclude the answer. Okay, let's come to the next question. Next was a very simple one. I think development questions were very good in November 24. Discuss gender identity, one or more factors. So following the same approach that we've done in previous questions, if you've come to this question directly, please visit the previous ones. What we do in a discuss question is, we just define the larger term given in the question first. So I would just define what is gender identity. You could define what is sex and gender also before defining gender identity, but I'm going to do it later into the answer. So that's why I don't want to be unnecessarily repetitive. Here I just define what is gender identity. This is also why planning your essays can be helpful to you, because you know where to define, where to elaborate on something, and where to keep yourself restricted. Okay, then they have suggested one or more factors. As always, I would suggest take any two factors. It gives you a good balance between depth and breadth. So I would take gender socialization by parents as one factor and the larger culture as another factor. I will emphasize socialization by parents because there's also gender socialization by peers. So just to keep it clear that I'm taking the parents one, I'm going to mention that. And I'm going to say I'm supporting by studies by Smith and Lloyd and Margaret Mead. Means respectively the first factor by Smith and Lloyd and the culture factor by Margaret Mead. So in the introduction, I have specified which factors I'm taking and which studies are going to support those factors. Give minimum word count to the introduction. Save your word count to show your understanding and all, which are the more valuable criteria on the mark scheme. Save your word count for that. So now, after having given this introduction, I want to talk about gender socialization by parents. So here I would differentiate what is sex and gender, emphasizing that sex is there anatomically by birth, but gender is what society defines, and then explaining how parents serve as agents to convey society's expectations to the child. So at length, I would explain what is gender socialization and how parents serve as agents for that, emphasizing on the fact that parents are the primary agents for socialization because they are the first ones whom the child encounters, and the child is heavily influenced by parents almost throughout his life. After that, I would summarize the study by Smith and Lloyd. Okay, in the standard format, aim, procedure, results, conclusion, just to give you a quick reminder of what that study is. It is that study in which parents had to see a child in either a blue or a red jumpsuit, blue or pink, and the child could either be a boy or girl. And then they just observed how the parents interacted with the child, finding that parents' behaviors were very stereotypical in the toys that they chose to play with the child. If it was a blue jumpsuit child, they chose the masculine toys to play with them. And if it was the pink jumpsuit child, they used the feminine toys to play with the child. Then giving the strengths and weaknesses of the argument that parents can gender socialize children and that could result in gender identity. A strength of that argument is, if that is the case, if parents can indeed socialize their children, it just makes for easy acculturation. There are certain expectations in a culture and parents can help children easily adapt to those expectations, making their living, so to say, much easier without problems. They can avoid them from facing hassles in society. Also, definitely in terms of methodological strength, the study is very strong by Smith and Lloyd. These type of studies which have been done in the area subtly demonstrate parents' stereotyping tendencies because parents are observed covertly, and that is why no social desirability is confounding the results. Also, the way they control the sex of the child could actually be a boy or girl. It's only that the child is dressed in either a pink or blue suit. That just goes to show that actual sex of the child does not matter. It's the perceptions of the parents which matters, meaning that we cannot attribute gender identity in that sense to the mannerisms of the child or the temperament of the child. It's purely parents' expectations from the child. So very well controlled study essentially, which gives good credibility to the role of parents in socializing children. Weaknesses, of course, though there is application, children can acculturate better. Gender stereotyping, danger is very high in these cases. Not allowing children to have their own identity as males or females and imposing culture's identities on them is dangerous for individual expression. Also, this area is very outdated in terms of methodological strengths. We know time has really passed. There is more acceptance of both genders. Gender demarcation is ceasing to exist in many cultures. So, no doubt, studies like Smith and Lloyd, which were done in the 70s, have shown parents' expectations in a certain way. Today, parents' expectations might not be the same. Now, I need to transition to the next factor, which is the larger culture. Very easy to transition in this particular answer. Whatever socialization parents are doing is reflective of what the larger culture is expecting from children, in the sense that, after all, parents are also socialized in that same culture and they're just continuing that transmission through generations. What they have learned in that their time, they're passing on to the children. So directly this one relates to the other factor, which is culture. So first I will explain that. Then I'll just define what culture is and what cultural expectations are. Every culture has its own way of living, and therefore they have their own roles. Roles term is important here, that they assign to males and females, like the breadwinning role or the domestic home making roles. That is what they assign and they expect from different genders. And then there is intolerance towards genders trying to cross their roles. So, how culture exactly can influence what is expected in the society, shown in the study by Mead. We can summarize the study as aim, procedure, results, conclusion. So, just to remind you, that study is about investigating three different tribes. In one of the tribes, masculine role was predominant in both males and females, what we stereotypically or traditionally call as masculine. In another tribe, feminine role was dominant, and in yet another tribe, it was the opposite. What is traditionally considered masculine was seen in the females, and what is considered feminine was seen in the males. So, in terms of strengths now of the argument that culture can give gender identity to individuals, again, it is very good in terms of acculturation, giving stability to individuals, just helps them to get incorporated into their culture more easily, gives some predictability to their behavior, direction to their behavior. They know exactly how to behave, which can avoid the whole identity dilemma or identity confusion, which can be very stressful. Methodologically, if we talk about it, in terms of Mead study is very strong methodologically because it is field study which is done across cultures, very realistic, high ecological validity, and lot of such anthropological studies are supportive. So lots of such realistic support is there for the role of culture in gender identity. But in terms of weaknesses, one issue is that again, the whole evidence which is coming from anthropology is all correlational. The assumption is because of culture, individuals are following masculine or feminine roles, but across cultures they are so spread apart geographically also, that nutrition, lifestyle, these type of things can be influential. And when we say that sex contributes to gender, biological factors are there. So any physiological influences coming from diet, nutrition, or any other practices relating to physiology in any culture can actually be the reasons for differential gender identity rather than culture. So alternative explanations are possible. In the end, as always, we can summarize the argument's strengths and weaknesses, and for future research we can give directions like more updated research is needed, whether cultural expectations have changed significantly or not. That is one thing that needs to be looked into. And besides that, definitely, because research has been reductionist in terms of what other factors can matter beyond culture, how culture can integrate with other factors to influence gender identity, that also needs to be investigated. So, as always, to summarize the structure of the answer, the first paragraph in the discussed question should be defining the key term in the question, pointing out to the examiner which explanations or arguments and which studies are being taken in support. If you want to know more about arguments and what do we mean by an argument supporting the argument, just watch any of my videos dedicated completely to an ERQ. Then we define key terms, narrowing down eventually to key terms relevant to a study which we are giving. In this case, Smith and Lloyd. Then we summarize the study very briefly. Then we give strengths and weaknesses of the argument, in this case that gender socialization can influence gender identity. and using the study as examples for the strengths and weaknesses we are giving. Same thing we repeat to the next explanation, in this case culture. But before that, we transition smoothly by showing the relevance to what we've already written. We just give coherence. So we've spoken about socialization by parents. It links to the larger culture because parents are agents of the larger culture. So then we come to culture as the factor. Same way we summarize a study, give strengths and weaknesses, and then we just summarize the whole answer and give directions for future research. So now one last answer for this video. In the development option, if you're preparing for brain development, you could answer somewhat like what I'm presenting here. Okay, so for the discuss command term first, we will explain what is brain development. A simple one-line definition does. So it is just growth in the structure and function, not only growth, any changes in the structure and functioning of the brain as a child grows up or as a child develops. That is known as brain development. They have asked for one or more factors. 2 is ideal. It will give you enough breadth and depth for the answer. Breadth totally and depth for each factor. I will point out which are the factors I'm taking. Early environmental deprivation is going to be one of my factors, and maturation is going to be the other. So I'll specify that to the examiner that this is what I'm going to take up in the question. And then studies are the Chugni et al. Or Chugani et al. For early environmental deprivation. I'm going to take that one, so I'll specify it here. And GATE for maturation in adolescence. So I'm in the first paragraph introduction just saying what is brain development, which are the factors I'm going to take in my essay, and which are the supporting studies. Then I will emphasize further on what is early environmental deprivation. So now I start showing my understanding. I can explain first broadly what do we mean by environment of a child, what type of activities, simulation can be there. I can give some examples. Then what would be a scenario of environmental enrichment and contrast it with what is environmental deprivation. So I just explain all these terms which are relevant to what I mean by early environmental deprivation. And then I can come to the Chugani et al. Study, because whatever is the more generalized definition of deprivation, they have reflected that only in their study. So there's no special terminology I need to give for their study in particular. So directly I come to that. Then I can give the aim, procedure and all of their study. If you're doing Chugani et al., just to remind you, this is that study in which they took a group of Romanian orphan children, and they took normal adults and focal epilepsy children, and they took PET scans of all these groups, and they showed that there are some peculiar brain deficits in the case of the Romanian orphans, which directly correspond to their deprivation, because that is how they differed from the other normal groups which were there in the study. Sorry, the normal and the epileptic group. Now, the larger argument we have made here is that early environmental deprivation can influence development. A strength of that argument, of course, is going to be application. We have to avoid depriving children at all costs in their early ages if we want them to have healthy brain development. And we can take Chugani as the example. So, especially at an age of around 1 month, because he's emphasized that that is when they were there in their cribs all alone in the orphanages. At that time, a lot of stimulation should be given to the child, because in his study till about 9 years, the effects of deprivation were being seen on the children. So to avoid that sort of deprivation at that age, we need to make sure that in the first few months of life, there is very good enrichment of the environment. Besides that, of course, methodological strength studies like Chugani, which are using PET scanning, it's a very accurate way of looking at the brain and the type of control groups taken to show that only deprivation is the reason for brain development issues and not anything else. That gives a lot of credibility to the influence of deprivation on stress. But coming to the weaknesses of this argument, one is again correlational issues in methodology. In a study like Chugani et al., no doubt environmental deprivation is seen, but a lot of other factors also then orphanages. It's like confounding, goes along with that level of the IV. In orphanages, lot of time there is even physical deprivation, nutrition is less, or physical abuse is there of children. That could differentiate them from those who are not in orphanages, rather than emotional trauma. So cause effect might be misplaced in case of environmental deprivation. Also, ethical concerns are there. Whenever you give ethical concerns or sample concerns of any study, make sure linking back is very clear. It should not look like you are evaluating one study for its own sake. Ethical concerns are then Chugani et al. Type of studies, like are we exploiting children's vulnerabilities and their deprivation just to further some points in science that needs to be checked. Because then the whole larger area of study of deprivation on brain development becomes unethical, and the larger question arises of such studies be done, or should we avoid investigating this area altogether. Now, to transition to the next factor, which is about maturation, we can show a slight contrast very briefly before coming into this. So far, we have spoken about environmental deprivation. While definitely that can play a role, development is not about all about the environment. It's also about natural unfolding of many processes or genetic unfolding. So lots of development, brain development, we can say can be a result of natural outcomes. Environment might not be everything, or might not be a substantial factor. So that way we can transition into this argument. Then for maturation, we just need to explain what is genetic inheritance and how genetic unfolding takes place to cause some changes in the brain. So be it something like pruning, which takes place from time to time, reducing brain volume to an extent, or increase in gray matter, neurogenesis, or better neural connections. All those are examples of maturation of the brain. And then to make it more specific to the study that we are taking, we can talk about how in adolescence, especially, maturation can be a significant factor in brain development. Then we can summarize Gid's study, in which he took a group of adolescents, did their MRI scanning, and found that there are certain areas where they show growth, certain areas which are not fully developed, like the prefrontal cortex, indicating naturally there's a lot of brain development which takes place in adolescence. In terms of strengths, definitely uh, these type of explanations have application in the form of predictability. If I can say at this age this sort of brain development will take place in an individual, I can tailor academic pursuits according to their stage of development, or social activities, social interactions according to their brain stages, to facilitate better overall development of the individual. So it's very good from an intervention point of view. Like the Chugani study shows that adolescents are lacking to some extent in prefrontal cortex development. So I expect them to be impulsive in nature. So how to prevent them from getting into risks or dangers like addiction, that can be a good application. Also, of course, again, methodological strengths are there. Chugani is also brain scanning study, MRI scanning. So it has the strength of being very accurate, giving a lot of credibility to the role of maturation in brain development. But in terms of weaknesses, it is reductionist again to assume that only maturation would lead to development. We've already seen environmental influences matter. In studies like Gade et al., for example, we can say on an average, we are seeing adolescents are showing certain development, must be individual differences, which could be coming from environmental factors which have been disregarded. So, alternative explanations are definitely possible. And then, as always, to conclude the answer, we can talk about all like summarizing arguments, strengths, and weaknesses. For future research for this type of answer, we can just talk about how both environment and maturation in conjunction should be considered. Both are bound to influence brain development, and focus of studies should not be selectively on one, because it does not give a realistic account of brain development. So, just to take an overview of how we've written the answer: introduction, definition pointing out what we are taking in the answer, which studies and which arguments. Elaborating on the first argument, explaining what is deprivation, linking to Chugani, giving strengths and weaknesses of the argument with Chugani as an example, then transitioning to maturation by saying that environment is not the only factor, maturation by itself can bring about a lot of brain development, gradually linking it to adolescence, coming to the GID study, which is about maturation in adolescence, giving strengths and weaknesses of the study, and then concluding off with a summary of the whole answer and giving direction for future research. So that is what I have to share in part 1 of this video. If things seem abstract to you, you need things more concretely, then you can download the model answers which I have uploaded, and this video can serve as a supplement with that. So if the videos and the outlines are not enough for you to prepare your own answers, you need more help. So download the model answers and then watch this video again. You will get more clarity. If you have any doubts or questions about this video, please leave them in the comments box below, and I will try to upload the next part of this lesson soon. Thank you for watching. All the best for your preparation, and goodbye.